We think our kids are always connected, but if it's all screen to screen, they're not developing emotional intelligence. They're building habits that skip the most important emotional training of all, being face to face with someone else's feelings. Hey friends, and welcome back to our Conversation Book Club. Today we're going to be exploring Chapter 7 of Disconnected by Thomas Kersting, How Handheld Devices Impact Emotional Development. This chapter digs into something deeper than screen time. It's about what happens inside our kids, their emotional development, their resilience, their ability to navigate life's ups and downs when screens begin to replace real life experiences. So let's dive in. So he talks about on page 132, 133, he talks about emotional intelligence, and he says low IQ across the board is causing students in high school to have emotional breakdowns, and why colleges are seeing double the number of emergency calls to their counseling departments. Now, emotional intelligence, it's skills like self-awareness, empathy, and impulse control. That's not a bonus, that's essential in life. And when these skills are underdeveloped, even small changes feel overwhelming. Many kids aren't emotionally equipped to handle discomfort, conflict, failure. And when your sense of stability depends on everything going smoothly, and you haven't built the tools to handle it when it doesn't, panic sets in. We can't just teach our kids math or manners. We have to teach them how to bounce back. And that only happens through real life experience, not from behind a screen. If emotional breakdowns are the outcome, fear of failure is often the root. And that brings us to our next point. Kersting says on page 134, students are afraid to fail. They do not take risks and need to be certain about things. And we often hear that today's kids are anxious, but this quote actually helps to explain why. When kids grow up in environments where failure is seen as unacceptable or where only perfect outcomes are praised, they stop taking chances. They choose safe path. They avoid uncertainty. And over time, that shrinks their ability to stretch, to grow, and to try something new. But failure isn't the enemy. It's a teacher. And Kersting puts it plainly. If you're not failing, it probably means you're not taking enough risk. And he said that on page 135. And this quote challenges the mindset that's too common, that failure is proof that you're not good enough. But Kersting reframes failure not as danger, but as evidence of effort. If that means that you've tried something hard, something new, something real. And that's the kind of risk-taking kids need in order to grow. Without small failures, kids don't build the muscle of resilience. They miss out on learning how to ask for help, recover from disappointment, or just try again. The real danger isn't failing, it's staying so safe that you never stretch far enough to find out who you can become. The message here isn't fail more, it's don't let the fear of failing stop you from trying. And as parents, we shape this mindset. If we only celebrate the wins, our kids start believing that's all we value. But if we also honor their effort, we give them permission to risk, learn, and grow. And all this reminds me of something a lot of kids experience, not in school, not during a big test, but in something as simple as trying out for something. So here's a story to share with your child. It's called School Play That Wasn't. So Jasmine loved acting, but only when no one was watching. She had fun doing impressions with her friends, and she knew the lines in class skits always. So when her teacher announced the audition for the school play, everyone said, "You have to try out." Jasmine wanted to. Really, she did. But the thought of forgetting her lines or tripping on stage made her stomach twist. I'm not good enough, she said. What if I mess up in front of everyone? So she didn't audition. That night, her younger brother asked for help with his practice for his audition for the same play. She read lines with him, coached him, and even showed him how to get one scene with more emotion. And he got the part. On opening night, Jasmine watched from the audience. Her brother was great, and so were the others. But instead of feeling proud, Jasmine felt a little bit hollow. She didn't regret missing the part. She regretted not trying. The next morning, she said to her mom, "Next time there's a play, I'm auditioning, even if I mess up." And the lesson here is being scared is normal. Messing up is part of learning. What matters most is showing up and giving yourself the chance. And then you can ask your child a couple of these questions. Why didn't Jasmine try out for the play even though she loved acting? Or have you ever skipped something because you were afraid you might mess up? Kids don't build courage through clicks and likes. They build it through real world moments, ones that stretch them, challenge them, and show them that they can handle more than they thought. And that's why emotional growth depends on something screens can't offer. So he talks about on page 135, he says EQ, so emotional intelligence, can only be learned and developed through face-to-face interaction with other people, not screen-to-screen interaction. Emotional intelligence isn't taught, it's caught. Kids pick up on it in everyday moments. The way a parent's voice softens during a tough talk, the look on a friend's face when they're about to cry, the pause in a sentence when someone doesn't know what to say. These are the unspoken signals that help kids learn empathy, self-awareness, and how to read a room. But here's the problem. Screens strip away those signals. In a text, you don't hear hesitation. On a game, you don't see a frown. When most conversations happen through filters or avatars, kids miss out on the full human experience. They learn to respond to words, but not to people. And that gap shows up everywhere, in friendships, in classrooms, even in how they handle conflict. The very skills that help them connect and succeed in the real world are underdeveloped because the real world has been replaced by a virtual one. We think our kids are always connected, but if it's all screen to screen, they're not developing emotional intelligence. They're building habits that skip the most important emotional training of all, being face to face with someone else's feelings. And when kids aren't grounded in real emotional connection, they're even more vulnerable to false ones. And that's where social media steps in, not with genuine feedback, but with a constant stream of comparison. So he says on page 137, social media is completely superficial and breeds insecurity. If everyone else's perfect life is constantly rubbed in your face, aren't you going to compare yourself to them? This quote calls out something that we all know, but sometimes forget applies just as intensely to kids. Social media creates a world where everyone else is doing better. Better vacations, better grades, better bodies, better lives. For developing minds, this doesn't just feel unfair, it feels personal. Kids begin to believe that their own life isn't enough unless it looks amazing. They don't measure success by effort anymore, but by how perfect it appears to everyone else. That's not confidence, that's insecurity. And the real danger is when comparison becomes constant, self-worth then becomes conditional. Kids start believing that they're only okay if they're winning, if they're liked, if they're seen. And that's a heavy weight to carry through middle school and beyond. Sometimes the smallest gestures can shift the way someone sees themselves. So here's a story that shows that you can read to your child. It's called The Note That Stuck. Tyreek wasn't on the cool list, and he knew that. He didn't have the best shoes. He didn't play soccer or recess. He wasn't the kid everyone crowded around. So when he got paired with Milo for a science project, the most popular kid in class, he almost asked to switch partners, but he didn't. On the day of the presentation, Tyreek explained the experiment with quiet confidence. He even cracked a joke that made the class laugh. Later that week, Milo handed him a folded note. As he was headed out for dismissal, inside it said, "Hey, thanks for being such a solid partner. I totally work with you again." It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a big announcement. But for the first time in a while, Tyreek felt like he mattered. And this lesson is for kids is you don't need a spotlight to make an impact. Sometimes it's the small moments, the ones that no one else sees, that help you realize your worth. And so you can ask your child a couple of questions. Why do you think the note meant so much to Tyreek? And has someone ever said something small that made a big difference to you? Moments of connection shape who kids believe they are, but what happens when screens start shaping them before they even know who they are? So he says on page 139 that preschoolers who had 2 hours or more of screen time each day showed clinically significant behavior problems. Now, I'm not trying to guilt anyone. This is just really about awareness. So every parent has used screens as a break or a distraction. I totally get that. I have. But when quick fixes become daily habits, they start shaping how a child's brain develops. So when a toddler should be learning to self-soothe, explore, and engage in the real world, screens shortcut those lessons. And the result is shorter attention spans, more meltdowns, less curiosity. Not because toddlers are badly behaved, but because their brains are being wired to expect constant stimulation. And we're not saying never use screens. It's about knowing when and why and making sure they're not replacing the human experience kids need most: play, patience, and face-to-face connection. So I want you to imagine for a second a toddler's brain, and it's like a muscle. In the early years, that muscle is learning how to wait, how to solve little problems, how to deal with big feelings. And every time they stack blocks, wait their turn, or calm down after a tantrum, they're working out that emotional muscle. But if a screen steps in every time they're bored, upset, or fussy, it's like giving that muscle a crutch instead of a workout. They don't get the reps, they don't build the strength, so later when life gets tricky and there's no screen to lean on, they don't know how to handle it because that muscle never had a chance to grow. Screens can soothe in the moment, but they can also steal the reps. And just like physical strength, emotional strength comes from practice, not from shortcuts. Now, just like a muscle won't grow without movement, emotional connection can't grow without presence. And that brings us to Kersting's final thought on page 143, where he said we must push our children and their friends to be mentally and physically present with each other. This is more than just putting devices away. It's about creating the kind of moments that devices can't replicate. Real laughter, even real arguments, real eye contact. These are the small everyday interactions that help kids practice empathy, self-regulation, and connection. When kids play a game, build a fort, or just sit around telling jokes, they're not just passing time, they're building skills that last. Conversation becomes more fluid, emotions become easier to read, and friendships grow deeper. You don't need to schedule perfect play dates or force deep talks. You just need to make space for kids to do that. And this chapter reminds us that screens aren't just taking up kids' time, they're reshaping their emotional world. But that trajectory isn't locked in. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of real connection is a chance to rebuild what has been quietly eroding. We can't protect our kid from every hard feeling, but we can help them grow strong enough to face it, not by scrolling past discomfort, but by sitting with it, talking through it, and showing up again and again for the moments that truly shape them. Thanks for being here. Keep showing up, and remember, keep having those conversations.